All righty. Our next presenter is Patricia Gaitley from MTSU, and she's turning our attention to the Day of the Dead, alive and well in Middle Tennessee. Addressing Latino cultural activity, here is Patricia Gaitley.
Thank you. And thank you for asking me or allowing me to be here today. I feel a little bit like a fish out of water because I've got no music and no slide display, so this was kind of a last-minute effort. Thank you. So just a little over a year ago, on the last Friday of October in 2017, I was leaving my classes at Middle Tennessee State University and stopped in to discuss weekend plans with one of our secretaries. When she asked what I was doing, I told her I was going to a Day of the Dead event at Cheekwood in Nashville. A moment later, she asked me again what I was doing, and I gave the same answer, a Day of the Dead celebration. She paused a moment and then asked, "Is that some kind of zombie thing?" I explained that no, it had nothing to do with zombies, but that it was a Mexican tradition during which the living honor and remember their deceased loved ones. Her lack of awareness about the festival was not altogether surprising, since it is, of course, not a Tennessee tradition, and one that has only in recent years become somewhat recognized locally. Sorry, this thing's kind of... Middle Tennessee is often called the Buckle of the Bible Belt, and while Halloween is a major and well-celebrated event in the area, Los Dias de los Muertos is something of a recent addition to Tennessee's annual festivals. It has come to be recognized more in recent years due to the increasingly visible Latino population and the proliferation of items sporting the colorful sugar skull, as you can see here, in local stores. And for the past 15 years, it has been celebrated at a public event at Cheekwood Estate and Gardens, a tourist destination located in the posh Belmead district of Nashville. It may be that my friend's confusion about the event came in part from the location. Cheekwood Estate and Gardens hosts many annual events, including celebrations of Christmas, Easter, Halloween, and Thanksgiving, as well as other exhibitions. Before the Day of the Dead event in October, the only event I had attended there was an exhibition of costumes from the British television show Downton Abbey, an event that seemed entirely appropriate for the venue, given that Cheekwood is advertised as, quote, one of the finest examples of an American country place-era estate. It's known for its world-class art exhibitions and spectacular gardens, and is located in one of the most expensive neighborhoods of Nashville, and not one with a large Latino population. In spite of the seeming contrast between location and event, for the past 15 years or so, Cheekwood has hosted a Day of the Dead celebration, an event which they describe thus. El Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, is one of the most important celebrations in Mexico and Latin America. The festivals, known for their colorful decorations, energetic music, and elaborate displays, demonstrate the culture's strong sense of love and respect for ancestors while celebrating the continuance of life. It continues, visitors will learn about the culture of their Latin American neighbors while exploring their colorful altar displays and shopping in the marketplace, and explains that local merchants sell flowers, food, art, and handmade items, which people buy to decorate their altars and tombs. Visit the vendors at the festival to uncover the talent of local artists, shop for unique gift items, and taste traditional foods. End quote. My own interest in the festival as a Middle Tennessee event was sparked when a professor from the Global Studies Department, together with his students, put on a Day of the Dead event at MTSU in 2016. The event consisted of demonstrations of face painting, paper flower making, traditional dance, and an especially moving part of the festival when students representing a variety of cultures spoke about the continuing significance of deceased loved ones in their lives. It was perhaps with this aspect that the event took on special significance, since it reached the heart of the celebration and, for me, made it more than just a cultural exercise. Dr. Antonio Vasquez, the professor responsible for the event, explained his purpose. He said, as an educator, I wanted my students to gain hands-on skills in collaboratively organizing a successful event to benefit the larger community. Toward this end, my students were involved in the design of the space and cross-cultural activities like building the altar, writing and sharing their own prayers for loved ones, and designing and decorating 3D printed skulls. Vasquez explained how he partnered with a faculty member from Human Sciences, whose students took on responsibility for preparing traditional foods for the event, including tamales, pan de dulce, decorative bread, and the like. Two student organizations, including Futuro, a Latino professional organization, also partnered with him. But for Vasquez, the event was twofold, and the second purpose was, quote, to add more dimensionality to the continued public conversation on Latinos at the national and local level, a conversation that Vasquez says follows two narratives, one viewing Latinos as, quote, good immigrants, who are hard workers and therefore worthy of U.S. citizenship in pursuit of the American dream, and the other that sees Latinos as, quote, threats to the status quo, criminals who are also burdens to society and threats to national security. Vasquez explained that recognizing a public event like Dia de los Muertos does not quite fit into this binary because of its long-standing tradition that spans centuries and thus precedes the making of the United States. He believes that the event helps to counter contested issues of belonging for Latinos in Middle Tennessee from a position of indigeneity and serves as one example that demonstrates how Latinos contribute to the cultural fabric of our imagined community. After attending the MTSU event with my interest decidedly piqued, I decided to explore other ways in which the Day of the Dead was celebrated in Middle Tennessee and was made aware of the Cheekwood event. I must confess to some initial cynicism, since the tradition and the setting seemed as though they would be so greatly at odds with each other, and I had to wonder to what degree Cheekwood could deliver an event that might be considered authentic, that word that so plagues folklorists. I also wondered what would make for an authentic event, given the fact that the tradition itself is Mexican, and although it has been celebrated in parts of the United States for several decades, the largest celebrations have tended to be in border communities and in states such as Arizona, Texas, and California, those with traditionally high Mexican-American populations. However, since moving to Middle Tennessee in 2006, I've become aware of an increasingly large Latino population in the area, although of course not all of those immigrants are from Mexico. One of the biggest surprises at the Cheekwood event might have been the involvement of groups and vendors from Central and South American cultures who have not, traditionally, celebrated the Day of the Dead, but are now part of the annual celebration at Cheekwood. For those unfamiliar with the tradition, the Day of the Dead is actually a season that begins in mid-October when, according to tradition, a formal invitation is issued by the living to their deceased loved ones, inviting the dead to return to their former homes on earth to eat, drink, and visit with their loved ones. The reunion, according to Sean Haley and Kurt Fukuda's scholarship, is a joyous time, eagerly anticipated. For the Mesoamerican peoples, there is believed to be a fine line that separates the world of the living from the supernatural world where the dead live. And on the Day of the Dead, that line dissolves and the two worlds temporarily become one. It is a similar belief to the one on which the Celtic tradition that has become known as Halloween is based, although it bears mentioning that the two holidays are not interchangeable in spite of the attempts of a variety of chain stores to merge the two in terms of marketing. The season is said to extend until November 30th, San Andreas Day, when San Andreas closes the gates of heaven after all the souls have returned. For the most part, though, the majority of the activity takes place on the first 2 days of November, the Spanish Catholic All Saints and All Souls Day. In some interpretations of the event, the occasion is somber, but in many parts of Mexico, it is a joyous, exuberant celebration. American author Tony Cohen describes his first experience of the celebration shortly after moving to Mexico. He says, the cemetery of San Miguel de Allende is seldom empty of visitors, what with the endless burials of the newly dead and those who gather daily among the headstones and crypts to visit with the departed. But today, November 2nd, is the Day of the Dead, and crowds throng the dusty entry road to the graveyard, bearing armfuls of marigolds, gladioli, carnations, and baskets of oranges and breads. They've come to picnic with their dead. The attitude of somber reverence I had brought as we would to other holy sites seems out of place among these calm, smiling, outwardly serene visitantes. All week long, the street and sidewalks around the plaza have been lined with tables of handmade sugar skulls, holy relics, candles, and wreaths of flowers in an open commemoration and celebration of death, more pre-Hispanic than Christian. Vendors display tiny wood coffins with cheerful, grinning plaster of Paris skulls inside, death's heads dangling from strings. This Mexican dance with death is beyond morbidity, more like its surreal antidote. Poe would be lost here, where laughter triumphs fright. Certainly the event at Cheekwood was a joyous one, but still there were serious overtones to it. And in fact, a surprising balance seems to have been achieved, both between celebration and somberness, and event and place. On an unseasonably cold day, I set out to see for myself how all this would play out. If the parking or lack thereof was anything to go by, it was going to be a popular event. I got there as many vendors were still setting up, but still there was plenty of activity, and on entrance was given a program of the activities scheduled during the day. The program detailed the art activities, vendors, and altar displays that visitors could experience during the day. An outdoor stage was set up for dance and music groups to perform on, and various other locations had displays and performances scheduled too. At the entrance gate, 2 brochures were available, one in Spanish, one in English, explaining the history and customs surrounding the event. Included was a map detailing the area from which the tradition comes, an overview, a history of the event, a description of the celebrations in Mexico and Guatemala, explaining the differences and similarities between the ways in which the 2 nations mark the occasion, as well as an overview of celebrations in Bolivia and Peru, before a page describing how Day of the Dead is celebrated in the United States, detailing both personal and community celebrations, such as the one at Cheekwood. It concludes, quote, whatever the mode of celebration, the festivals, art exhibits, and races are a way for people to recognize an important holiday in many Hispanic cultures and share customs from their homeland. The next page describes common symbols of the holiday, including the colorful sugar skulls, which have become so ubiquitous at this time of year, and which now adorn everything from simple signs and decorations to shower curtains, luggage, throws and pillows, socks, even shoes, bath mats, personal checks, and believe it or not, Christmas decorations. Thank you, World Market. The brochure concludes with a selection of possibilities for further reading, and it's prepared by the Center for Latin American Studies at Vanderbilt University. And it really does a good job, actually, of giving a fairly detailed overview of the holiday and its history and its meaning. The community is encouraged to get involved in the Cheekwood event in many different ways and on many different levels. I had more or less anticipated that the majority of participants would be of Latino descent and the majority of observers would be non-Latinos. That might have been broadly true, but was not necessarily the case, nor did it tell the whole story. The greatest demonstration of involvement by a variety of cultural groups might have come from the tapete display and competition. According to the program, tapete is the Spanish word for carpet. I'm not sure that's entirely the whole, but anyway. And it describes how these carpets are usually made with colored sand and are a tradition associated with the holiday because, like life, they are temporary. At Cheekwood, the participants used chalk to create large-scale color designs to honor the deceased. Visitors can vote for their favorite. They are created by local students, each representing either their school from elementary to high school, or their club, including USN International Club, South Fulton Spanish Club, etc. The students I observed working on the tapates seemed to be thoroughly enjoying the opportunity to participate and compete, while also, of course, learning about the tradition and interpreting it in their own way. Other art activities in which visitors could participate included paper cutting, making colorful marigolds, mask making, decorating sugar skulls, and drawing or painting a posada, a skeleton-themed piece of artwork. Certainly the idea seemed to be to allow visitors to participate as much or as little as they desired, but the opportunity to participate and to learn was available to all. There were multiple vendors at the event, all willing to talk about their wares and discuss their culture. Not all were from countries who celebrate the Day of the Dead, and this was one of the more interesting aspects of this event for me, as they explained that in their country this was not something they did. Many of the items for sale were related to the Day of the Dead, but some were merely representative of the country or region from which the vendor originated. Two in particular were happy to talk to me about their involvement. One was an artist whom I had met the previous August at the Greenway Art and Craft Festival in Murfreesboro. His artwork can be described as focusing on the darker side of the human experience, and he had told me about his involvement with the Day of the Dead event, which is where I found him that morning. Cody Hale had earned a BA in illustration from the Savannah College of Art and Design, so he could be described as a trained artist. 2017 was his second year as a vendor at the Day of the Dead celebration, and he describes it as one of my favorite events. He expected less attendees that year because of the cold weather, but found the turnout to be just as good. He says, "The crowd at Cheekwood likes to spend money. Cheekwood is a wealthy area, so I assume that's part of the reason why people are inclined to buy. I also think that people like to buy souvenirs from events they want to remember, and this is a fun cultural event." He describes the crowd attending the event as very diverse, a perspective that I would agree with. He does, though, think that most of the visitors are not of Latino descent and would suggest that the event attracts non-Latinos because, in his words, it is a colorful and festive celebration of the macabre subject of death. He also thinks that people see the celebration as, in his words, a romantic festival that ironically beautifies death, which is generally seen as a dark and sad fact of life. The general population celebrates death in a much more somber way, where everyone dresses in black and mourns over the lost. In comparison, this is a cheerful, colorful celebration. Hale's words might have hit upon something interesting. One of the things that makes Cheekwood's event so unlikely is that it takes place right in the middle of the Bible Belt, an area rich in churches of the Protestant tradition, but many of which are non-denominational or tend toward Baptist or Church of Christ. While the Protestant calendar does allow for the celebration of All Souls and All Saints' days, days to remember the deceased, most churches in this tradition either give those days scant recognition or completely disregard this part of the church's calendar. All eyes are on Halloween, usually in attempts to provide some kind of event that allows kids to dress up and collect candy while drawing the focus away from the more macabre elements of the holiday. Thus, the days to remember the dead are brushed aside, as though the acknowledgement of death and remembering deceased loved ones is not important. Maybe the foreign, but increasingly familiar Day of the Dead is appealing because it does not overlook the fact that death is a part of life. Not only does it acknowledge death, it celebrates it and emphasizes the continuing connection between the living and the dead. It's also worth noting that Disney's Coco came out that same year, a mainstream movie that has further brought attention to the tradition. Cody Hale continues, "I also think that people are drawn to and fascinated by the unknown, especially when it's depicted in a light-hearted way. A lot of my artwork revolves around the unknown. Dia de los Muertos' artistic and imaginative nature makes it very appealing for people who like to use their imaginations, which I think most of us do. In his words, many non-Hispanic people also wrongly associate the Day of the Dead festival with Halloween, and Halloween is a favorite holiday for lots of people because of its dark and mysterious nature." Regarding the cultural aspect of the event, Hale suggests, "It seems as though awareness of foreign cultures has been growing across America and all over the world. We're also connected these days through the internet and social media. And I think that Hollywood has romanticized many cultural events and customs. More and more people are wanting to be well-cultured and well-traveled, and events like Cheekwood's was designed to introduce the Hispanic holiday to non-Hispanic people. And where I'm using the term Hispanic there, it's his words. I've been told that Latino is preferable these days, but those are his words, so I wanted to stay true to what he had said. His insights shed light on an aspect of the event that is worth noting. Cheekwood's clientele tend to be the more middle and upper class members of the community and mostly white. And events such as this allows those, including myself, an opportunity to become acquainted with a foreign tradition, but in a safe, non-threatening environment. After all, this is a public event that allows for the tradition to be experienced close up, but also at a safe distance. It is both personal and impersonal. Hale explains that the event appeals to both Hispanic and non-Hispanic vendors, but adds most of the entertainment is provided by those, in his words, deeply rooted in the culture. So Hale sees the event as providing a blend of cultures, allowing those for whom it is a traditional custom to share it with those less familiar with it, and providing a blend of entertainment and education. Another vendor at the event was Elena Vargas, whose company Dos Fridas specializes in Mexican folk art and Costa Rican coffee. It was not until meeting with her after the event that I learned the name of her company referred to the Mexican artist Frida Kahlo, an artist whom some of her own artwork features, and one with whom Vargas feels a strong connection. Our meeting after the Cheekwood event took place at Plaza Mariachi, and I know we've already mentioned Plaza Mariachi today, a complex of restaurants and shops on the corner of Harding Place and Nolensville Pike, one of the most cosmopolitan suburbs of South Nashville, where Vargas was renting a pop-up store before packing up and leaving for Costa Rica to buy more artwork. Vargas has been attending Cheekwood's event for about 13 years and sells everything from paintings and jewelry to decorations, magnets, coloring books, dolls, bags, not dogs, dolls, bags, and of course coffee. Her original artwork is intriguing, and she has a blend of Latino customers who like seeing the things they are familiar with in the United States, and also interested outsiders like myself. Along with the skull-decorated Day of the Dead art, much of her work depicts the Virgin de Guadalupe, a popular Mexican-American religious folk art figure. She also had paintings of La Llorona, a mythical figure from the Mexican folk tale. Vargas acknowledges the influence of Frida Kahlo on her own artwork and is also very willing to explain her artwork and the traditions to which it alludes to interesting parties like myself. In continuing to present her artwork and discuss her culture at the Cheekwood event, she acknowledges its significance as an event in Nashville that allows her to share her art, her culture, and her appreciation of her heritage, both with those that share it and with those that don't. One of the more interesting aspects of the event for me was the display of altars, both among the outdoor vendors and within an exhibition hall. An integral aspect of the Day of the Dead celebration is the altar display featuring different elements that both honor and represent the dead, including pictures of the deceased loved ones and various elements to invite them to visit. Often these take on a poignant significance, whether or not one is familiar with those being remembered or not. The program refers to these as ofrendas and states, all across Mexico and beyond, families honor their ancestors by creating altars decorated with items that the deceased enjoyed in life, and encourages visitors to learn more about this tradition as you tour the creative ofrendas by local groups and organizations. The participants at Cheekwood's event consisted not of individual families who would be more likely to display their ofrendas at home, but the Catholic Charities of Tennessee, the Center for Latin Studies at Vanderbilt University, Equal Chance for Education, Metro Nashville Police Department, Victim Intervention Program, Metro Public Health Department, 10 Care Kids Community Outreach, and St. Cecilia Academy and University Schools of Nashville. These were the groups that had their altars on display. The involvement of the Metro Nashville Police Department Victim Intervention Program was manned by Karina Fernandez, who talked to me about incidents of domestic violence, and who used this event to make their presence and their resources known to those in the Latino community. This is an important outreach, especially given the precarious nature of the immigration status of some of those Fernandez might want to reach. This aspect of the festival adds another layer of complexity to its significance. Folklorists Martha Sims and Martine Stevens assert that folklore is a discipline based on the study of tradition. Each folk group has its own traditions, and these are shared among those who are current members of the folk group. Most folklorists agree that any folk group's traditions are susceptible to change over time, which makes folklore both adaptable and sustainable, vital and dynamic. Anthropologist Clifford Geertz posits the idea of culture as a web, so that traditions are not merely passed on from generation to generation vertically, but also shared horizontally as the web spreads from its center and incorporates those from the initial folk group as they become exposed to, and those outside as they become exposed to the traditions. Sometimes those caught up in the folkloric web will begin to adopt these traditions to which they become exposed, at least in some permutation, and might even begin to co-opt them as their own. At first glance, it might seem as if the Day of the Dead event at Cheekwood is an example of two disparate worlds being forced together, and one might wonder just whose event it is. Admittedly, Cheekwood seems an unlikely setting for the event, but then the event itself is really about the coming together of two states of being, life and death, the living and the dead, and allowing them to coexist, if only for a brief period of time. In much the same way, the Day of the Dead being celebrated at Cheekwood is an opportunity for groups that might not typically come into contact with each other to learn from each other and to appreciate each other's traditions, and perhaps specifically to allow an ethnic group often woefully underrepresented in many ways to share their culture and heritage with the dominant culture. The Day of the Dead celebration at Cheekwood might have little in common with the way it has traditionally been celebrated in Mexico or other parts of Central or South America, but in order for customs and traditions to survive and thrive, they have to adapt. As Latino population continues to grow in Middle Tennessee, so Middle Tennessee adopts aspects of the culture it brings with it. And so events like that at Cheekwood will continue to be enjoyed by those who want the opportunity to learn a little about their new neighbors, and perhaps even include their traditions in their own annual celebrations in a way that takes on meaning for them while also paying homage to the people and cultures that bring such a holiday to their attention. Thank you.